WLRN edition 110 in 3, 2, 1.
I was born woman, off my knees I will stand for my liberation. Sisters, rise again. I was born woman, off my knees I will stand for my liberation. Rise and rise again.
Greetings and welcome to the 110th edition podcast of Women's Liberation Radio News for this Thursday, June 5th, 2025. I'm Thistle, founding member of the WLRN Collective and current president of the board. Thanks for tuning in. Before we get started with the show, I wanted to remind you that Aurora, Frida, and I are going to the FiLia conference in Brighton, UK this coming October. We made a fundraising video you can watch if you go to WLRNmedia.com and click on the post with the big tip jar. Learn about our trip and how your support will result in some totally excellent radical feminist, grassroots, on-the-ground coverage of the conference. This conference is expected to draw over 3,000 women from around the world. To donate to get WLRN members to FiLia 2025, go to WLRNmedia.com and click on the post with the big tip jar. Thanks! This month's edition continues the conversation we had last month about prostitution and pornography. In today's show, we'll hear from Dianne Post, an American attorney based in Arizona with a long career in advocacy work for girls and women. She will tell us about the male bias in the American justice system and how most laws in this country do not promote or protect the rights and dignity of women. We also talk about feminist activism to counter the problem of prostitution and pornography. Dianne recommends organizations you can plug into to get involved. Dianne's recs are linked to in the description of today's podcast. We'll also replay Sekhmet's commentary from last month's show, as it is still pertinent and an excellent listen for women who are seeking honest and true sexual health and empowerment away from the male gaze and the sex industry. The team at WLRN produces a monthly radio broadcast to break the sound barrier women are blocked by under the status quo rule of men. This blocking of women's discourse we see in all sectors of society, be they conservative, liberal, mainstream, progressive, or radical. The thread that runs through all of American politics, except for separatist feminism, is male dominance and entitlement in all spheres. To start off today's edition, here's Aurora with women's news from around the globe for this Thursday, June 5th. Take it away, Aurora.
The ramifications of April's UK Supreme Court ruling affirming that the legal definition of woman is based on biological sex under the Equality Act are already coming into view. As of June 1st, trans-identified men will no longer be able to compete in women's soccer leagues in England at both the amateur and professional levels. The Scottish Football Association has also announced a restriction on male players in women's teams for the coming season. The UK Labour Party is expected to ban men from its all-women shortlists and has postponed its annual women's conference in the wake of the Supreme Court decision. On the cancelling of the conference, a spokeswoman from the Labour Women's Declaration Group, which supports sex-based rights, says, quote, "We are shocked that hundreds of women in the Labour Party might be prevented from meeting at the conference because the National Executive Committee, Labour's governing body, would prefer to disadvantage all women rather than to exclude the very small number of trans-identified men who may wish to attend the conference." The Times also reports that Britain's equality regulator is expected to advise that restrooms, locker rooms, and shelters should be apportioned according to biological sex. The federal trial against hip-hop star and mogul Sean Combs also known as P. Diddy or Puff Daddy, on charges of sex trafficking and racketeering began on May 12th. Combs has pleaded not guilty to all charges. Cassandra Cassie Ventura, Combs' ex-girlfriend and longtime sexual abuse victim, provided nearly 20 hours of testimony documenting the violence and coercion she endured during the decade of her relationship with the defendant. Ventura stated that Combs raped her in 2018 and described being forced into participating in and hiring prostituted women for drug-fueled sexual parties called freak-offs. Other witnesses have testified to corroborate Ventura's allegations, including Combs' former assistant under the pseudonym Mia, who also recounted how she herself was raped and repeatedly assaulted by Combs. If convicted on all counts, Combs would be sentenced to a minimum 15 years in prison, with the possibility of a life sentence. He is also facing numerous civil lawsuits from both women and men who claim that he drugged and sexually assaulted them. The French actor Gérard Depardieu was convicted in a Paris court on May 13th of sexually assaulting 2 women on a film set in 2021, for which he received an 18-month suspended sentence. With a suspended sentence, Depardieu will not actually go to prison unless he commits another offense. However, the actor must also pay the 2 women a total of 29,000 euros in fines, and will have his name listed in France's National Sex Offender Database. Previously, Depardieu has been accused of sexual misconduct by over 20 women, but this is the first case to proceed to court. The guilty verdict has been deemed a victory for the Me Too movement in France. A public mural went on display early last month in Melbourne, Australia, depicting a woman in a kitten-eared red fetish costume, gagged and tied with ropes. Entitled King Bakubi, in homage to the style of Japanese bondage that it portrays, the mural is the work of Los Angeles-based artist Lauren Y.S., who identifies as non-binary and was commissioned for the project by a photographer who wanted something LGBTQ-inspired. Responding to objections that the imagery glorified sexual violence, the artist told reporters that the mural was, quote, about empowerment and queer selfhood. After the Australian grassroots feminist organization Collective Shout launched a campaign inviting people to contact the city council to demand that the mural be removed, the council received over 1,500 emails. The business responsible for the mural has since been fined by the city for putting it up without a permit, and the mural itself has been tagged over by graffiti artists. A UK court has rejected the appeal of a young woman sentenced to life in prison in 2018 for stabbing a man to death as he raped her. Martina Oganeska was only 18 when she was convicted for killing the man. She is currently set to spend 17 years in prison. The aim of the appeal was to reduce that term to 12 or 13 years. At the original sentencing hearing, the judge acknowledged that the rapist, Philip Jaskowitz, quote, undoubtedly touched Oganeska sexually and was violent to her before he was killed, but denied that the killing was in self-defense because Oganeska had brought a knife to the scene. The judge also refused to take into consideration the fact that she had been raped once before at the age of 14 and was suffering from post-traumatic stress. Justice for Women, a UK feminist organization that advocates for women who have fought back against violent male partners, describes Oganeska as, quote, a double victim of a misogynist justice system. Valeria Marquez, 23, a Mexican social media beauty influencer, was killed while live streaming on TikTok on May 13th, when a man entered her Guadalajara salon and shot her to death. No suspect has been named, and the motive for the murder is yet to be determined, but Marquez's death is being investigated as a femicide, according to state prosecutors. Femicide is a regular event in Mexico, where the UN reports that 10 women or girls are killed each day by partners or family members. Authorities are also investigating the possibility that Marquez's murder may have been a contract killing. A pregnant woman in Georgia declared brain dead after a severe stroke is being maintained on life support until August, when her fetus can be delivered via C-section. The family of Adriana Smith, 30, was told by Emory University Hospital staff that she must be kept alive in order to comply with the state's strict anti-abortion law. Georgia's law, known as the Life Act, was adopted in 2019, but not enforced until after the overturning of Roe v. Wade in 2022. It bars physicians in the state from performing abortions once cardiac activity in the fetus can be detected, typically occurring around the 6th week of pregnancy. According to UN Women's most recent analysis, published on May 19th, an estimated 28,000 Palestinian women and girls have been killed since the war in Gaza began in October of 2023. That total amounts to an average of 1 girl and 1 woman killed every hour in the bombardment by Israel. Last month, 12 women from Women's Liberation Front, or WOLF, traveled to Washington, D.C. to speak to legislators about the harms that transgenderist policies pose to women and girls in the United States. In advance of these meetings, a reporter from political news site The Hill called Democratic representatives and senators with whom WOLF had scheduled meetings to demand that they explain themselves, which may have been a factor in a number of these legislatures' decision to cancel their appointments with WOLF. Nonetheless, WOLF has reported that their trip to Washington was productive overall, with the reception from lawmakers on both sides of the partisan divide, quote, overwhelmingly positive. A WOLF representative writes, quote, until we did this, we had no idea how many allies we'd find, and how many representatives would welcome this conversation with us. WOLF plans to expand the effort in 2026 with a week-long 30-woman, 300-meeting strike on the Capitol. Susan Brown Miller, author of the classic best-selling 1975 book Against Our Will, Men, Women, and Rape, died in New York on May 24th at the age of 90. Brown Miller was a journalist, an anti-war and civil rights activist before becoming a leading figure in the women's liberation movement of the 1960s and 70s. Her book, Against Our Will, put the feminist analysis of rape and men's sexual violence on the map like nothing before it, opening a national dialogue on the issue and spurring the founding of the United States' first rape crisis centers. Brown Miller was also active in organizing against pornography. Her other books include Femininity, published in 1984, and In Our Time, Memoir of a Revolution, published in 1999. Previous research has established that men are responsible for a greater percentage of greenhouse gas emissions than women, but a French study published last month shines a light on the specific reasons for that gap. According to the study, men's consumption of red meat and penchant for cars explains the difference in pollution, even after accounting for men's greater calorie consumption and tendency to travel longer distances. Co-author of the study, Ondine Berlin, an economist at the London School of Economics and Political Science, comments, quote, our results suggest that traditional gender norms, particularly those linking masculinity with red meat consumption and car use, play a significant role in shaping individual carbon footprints. That concludes WLRN's World News segment for Thursday, June 5th. I'm Aurora. Please share your news stories, announcements, and tips with us by emailing info@WLRNmedia.com and letting us know what's going on.
This is Joe Brew, and you are listening to WLRN.
The world is confusing when you're only little. Your mama and daddy part company. I lived with my mama, I visited daddy, but he did funny things to me. The way that he touched me, felt kind of wrong, but he said that he loved me, he'd sing me a song. When I told Mama what he had done, she looked frightened, she cried all night long. So it's goodbye Mississippi, goodbye to Gulfport. Mama and I are running for free, 'cause it seems that the strangers who she said would help us, want to take her away from me. We went to visit a lady downtown who smiled. I was so pretty, she said. I played with her dolls, I talked of the times when he'd hurt me at night in my bed. Mama told some people about what had happened. She said they'd make sure it didn't happen again. But they didn't believe her or the nice lady. So we're running tonight, we're gone. We're running tonight, we're gone. And it's goodbye Mississippi, goodbye to Gulfport. Mama and I are running for free. 'Cause it seems that the strangers who she said would help us want to take her away from me. Mississippi, goodbye to Gulfport. Mama and I are running for free. 'Cause it seems that the strangers who she said would help us want to take her away from me. They won't take her away from me. Confusing when you're only little.
That was Jess Hawk Oakenstar with her song Goodbye Mississippi, a song suggested by our guest Dianne Post. The song illustrates the problem with the law and society in general when it comes to women trying to escape male violence. Dianne talks extensively in the interview with Thistle about the problem of male bias in the system on many levels and how it is up to us to save ourselves and create a strong, cohesive, and collective response that can withstand the blows of patriarchy that certainly always come pounding down on women who defy the will and violence of men. Take a listen to the fount of knowledge and wisdom Dianne Post brings to WLRN's airwaves. Thanks for staying tuned to WLRN.
Okay, so this is Thistle Pedersen reporting for WLRN, and I've got Dianne Post with me here today. She's been an attorney since 1980. For more than 18 years, she represented battered women and molested children in family and juvenile court. In 1998, she shifted to international human rights law, focusing on sex-based violence, which remains her primary practice today. She's lived in 5 countries: Russia, Moscow and Far East, Cambodia, Hungary, Algeria, and Kenya. And she's worked in 14 others for short periods of time. She is the legal director for Secular Coalition for Arizona, and locally she's active in the NAACP, National Organization for Women, and the ERA Task Force Arizona. She's published 6 law review articles, more than 3 dozen manuals, more than 3 dozen articles in 5 countries, columns in 10 publications, 6 short stories, 4 of which have won prizes, and 2 books. So very scholarly. Welcome to WLRN, Dianne.
Well, thank you very much.
I wanted to start by asking you, I mean, you have been working with the law and the legal system your entire career, and it's been this long, fruitful career. What is male bias in the system, and how can you tell that there's male bias in the system, and how does that impact girls and women? So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Well, first off, it hasn't been my entire career. I was 32 when I became a lawyer, so I had 10 years of working that was in something else before I found what was really the best thing for me, and that is the law. So male bias, and what many people forget is, where did our law come from? It came from British common law. We were a British colony. When they came over here, they brought British law and their ideas about the law with them. And at the time that the Constitution was written, for example, as everybody knows, women were not in the Constitution. They were not even considered. They were not even thought about. And as we all know, Abigail Adams said to her husband, "Don't forget the ladies, or they will foment a rebellion." Well, they forgot the ladies, and we did foment a rebellion, and it is still going on. Even enslaved people are mentioned in the Constitution because the South wanted them to be counted as 4/5 so they could have more representation in the House of Representatives and in the Electoral College. Indians are mentioned in the Constitution because they say Indians not taxed can be counted in a certain way. But women are absolutely not mentioned at all. I mean, even immigrants are mentioned because it talks about who has the power to make the immigration law. But we did not even exist. And
can I just interrupt for a second? Some slaves are some slaves are women. Some immigrants are women.
Correct.
So in that sense, they're mentioned, but human beings are never represented by their sex except the male sex in the Constitution. I mean, it's all men, right?
Correct.
So it's specific to men.
Now, a constitutional scholar who is a friend of mine and a historian, he says that at the time, the word man meant women and men. So that perhaps they felt they didn't have to say it. However, we all know that fallacy. When it's allegedly man means women and men, but in reality, it never did. So there was the beginning of the problem. But the second part of the problem, and I just got in a big fight about this with a fight we're having out here about the mandatory 50-50 custody, which is that at one point in time, men owned women. They owned them as property. They could sell them, beat them. They could even kill them. They could make them work somewhere else, take their money. They were entitled to women's money.
Now you're talking British law, right?
Yes. When they came here, they brought that common law. By the time they came here in the 1700s, all of that was not true yet. You know, it wasn't true still by the time they came. However, it was still in the law. But in the UK, as in the US, Married Women's Property Acts had to be passed in order to make our property ours, in order to make our wages ours. And then we had to pass laws that said women are entitled to custody of their children. One of the law review articles that I wrote shows that up until the 50s, men always got the children because they belonged to them. Now, in the 50s, there came the doctrine of tender years. Now, tender years refer to the fact that it was still a baby. Under 12 is usually what they meant by tender years. And the mother would keep the child until the tender years were over. And then the child would go to the father because it was old enough to work. So then the father was to put the child to work or set him on a path to some kind of a job. Now, this wasn't true for girls because, of course, they weren't supposed to work. They were supposed to just get married and have children, which is a lot of work itself. But they didn't, it wasn't paid work, and it still isn't paid work. So that was the situation for a while. Then in the 60s is the only decade, 10 years in the 60s, when custody was given, at least according to the reported cases and the law reporters, equally between men and women. Those 10 years, that's it. And as we all know, that was a time of huge change in the United States.
And wasn't that when women were allowed to have their own bank accounts finally? And
no, that didn't start till after 1973. 1973 is when the laws passed about women being able to have their own bank accounts, their own credit cards, sign contracts, all of those kinds of things. And just a few years ago in the ERA work that we did out here in Arizona, we went through every statute in the statute books, and we still found a statute that said that married women could sign contracts without their husband. Now, why was that in the law? Because it used to be that they couldn't. So those kinds of laws are not something that happened, in the 1400s. They are still here and have an impact. So the big fight I got into was when they were talking about this 50-50 custody for fathers. Well, they should, have a presumption of 50-50. No, they shouldn't. No, they shouldn't. The caretaker of the child should have the presumption, not the father or the mother, the caretaker of the child, whoever the hell that is. Most of the time, we know that's the mother. Not every time, most of the time.
What if it's the grandmother or the grandfather?
Well, then you still have, you run into a constitutional issue because parenting is a constitutional right. You have a right to keep your own child. So even if the caretaker was the grandmother, she does not have a superior right to the biological parent.
And if it's between the male parent and the female parent, is there a bias in the law that favors one over the other, or there's not?
Well, I just told you that only in the 10 years of the 60s was custody given equally. After that time, because there was so much work on not giving custody to abusers, and the pushback was to give 50-50 so that abusers could get custody, and they do. Research has shown, her name just flew out of my head, did a nationwide study paid for by the Department of Justice some years ago to find that, in fact, when domestic violence is alleged by the mother, the father gets custody more often than not. So when I started practicing, they told me, other older lawyers and experienced lawyers told me, do not bring up domestic violence. They didn't call it that. They said, do not bring up violence, in the family, because the woman will lose custody. That was true when I started. It's true today. So yes, there is a terrible bias. Why? Because of the old belief that men own children and men own women. So
and that's a belief. That's a cultural, social problem, and it used to be the law.
Yes, it used to be the law. Now, think back to Dobbs. Dobbs was not that long ago, right? 2 years ago now. One of the cases that the Supreme Court justice used in Dobbs was a 1600, it was in 1648 or 84, I can't remember, decision from the UK to say that at that time women did not have the right to make decisions about their bodies. Now, if in 2023, our Supreme Court can go back to the law in Britain, in the UK, in the 1600s, and use that to justify taking away women's rights, why couldn't they do it again? They will if they can.
Great question. Wow. Huh. I thought.
Oh, yes, there was a bias towards males and everything.
We'll get to this later on in the conversation, but, international or laws that are passed in other countries and in different time periods even can impact our U.S. law. And I mean, I don't know how many people actually know that. So that's pretty fascinating. I wanted to get to the topic at hand about the U.S. laws and how they impact girls and women with regard to prostitution and pornography, and I know you've got a lot of experience looking at this, and how are the laws set up to either harm or aid girls and women with regard to this issue?
Badly. Arizona,
Okay.
the U.S. has some of the worst laws. All right, let's start with prostitution. All right. There is only one place in the United States where prostitution is legal, and that is in Nevada, but not in Clark County. So Las Vegas is Clark County, and prostitution is not legal in Las Vegas. Yeah, you try to tell those people there that nobody believes that, but that is the law. It is only legal in the other counties in brothels, not on the street, not you to go to somebody's apartment. It's only legal in brothels where women can be controlled. Period. And there's been many studies again on this. The brothels are like prisons. They are locked in there. They cannot go places on their own. They cannot go when they want to. They cannot just drive out of there. They're gated, they're fenced. They're like prisons. That is the only prostitution that is legal in the United States. Does it happen everywhere? Yes, it does. And here's the problem, except in Maine, in every state, who is punished when an act of prostitution occurs? The woman. They don't arrest the John. They don't arrest the facilitator. They arrest the woman, who is in fact the victim. So the U.S. has terrible laws on prostitution. Maine is the only state that has adopted the Nordic model or the equality model. It started out as the Nordic model in 1999 when Sweden adopted it and said, this is ridiculous. The fact that a man can buy a woman means there is no equality between men and women. Am I equal with a dog because I can buy one? No. So that was passed in Sweden to much attack, of course, and still being attacked. And it has spread around the world, and it's now in, I think, 6 countries. I have them written down here. Let's see if I can find them. Not that it is all that important, but the Nordic countries passed it. France, Ireland, both parts of Ireland, Israel, and South Korea passed it and then got rid of it. And I think that's it. And then recently, Maine has passed it. It's the only state in the United States. So in the Nordic model, or the equality model, as we call it, it's the John who was arrested because he is committing the illegal act of paying money for a sex act. She is often the victim, has been coerced, has been beaten, is under 18. Any of those things is in poverty, so she really has no ability to have meaningful consent. The other person who is arrested is the facilitator. That's the pimp. And those other people involved, like the hotel where they keep them, or the taxi drivers who take them to their gigs. So that's the model, and it has provisions that the victim, it can be a man or a woman, can escape. They will give them the services, the finances, the apartment, the whatever, education and training, whatever they need to escape. So they give them the option to escape, but they don't prosecute them, and they will wipe out their prior criminal records.
And how long has this been the law in Maine, and is it working well?
Let me go down and find Maine. It happened in 2023.
So not long.
It's been a little over a year, so they won't have a heck of a lot of, I didn't find any statistics. Oh, here's the list of who has it. Sweden, Iceland, Norway, Canada. Oh, Canada, I forgot. Northern Ireland, France, Republic of Ireland, and Israel. And as I said, South Korea had it, and then they threw it out. So they've only had this. I didn't find any statistics on how it's been working. However, what I do know, many studies have been done on this, the Nordic model. It is the only solution that works. The only one. The other alternatives of criminalizing everything, which isn't really done anywhere, but criminalizing her, the seller, the buyer, and the facilitator isn't anywhere. But so it's never been done. Actually, I think some states did do it. It didn't work. We actually did it in Tucson for a while. They arrested the men, and the men were so powerful and upset that they got it thrown out, so that they couldn't arrest the men anymore. Unless the victim is a minor, then of course they can. But the other model is to decriminalize it, have nothing be illegal, and let everybody just run rampant. Well, that's done in several places. Germany, for example, Australia. And there are places in the world where that is the model, and it is a disaster. And in the Amsterdam, with the red light booths and all of that, has been famous for years as the place to go to, buy prostitutes. They have shut down a lot of that business because it's such an abject failure, in that the women continue to be harmed. It grows, it destroys neighborhoods, it destroys people. 14-year-old boys going there. This is what they learn about women, that they are commodities, items for sale. This is what they learn. So the government has actually shut it down. And the other thing the government said was it is impossible to run a legal business because you must be involved with the illegal gangs that do trafficking around the world. You cannot escape it. If you are doing prostitution, you are doing trafficking, because there has to be a constant inflow of new bodies for the men to use. And where do those new bodies come from? They're trafficked from countries where the women have no ability to consent because they have no money or they have no rights. And one of the things they also found in the Amsterdam research is that 3% of the women being prostituted there were from Europe. Would you take that job? Hell no, nobody would take that job. So they bring in women from Africa, from South America, from East Asia. They're trafficked in from all around the world. So you cannot escape trafficking.
How many women are trafficked worldwide? Do we have any numbers of how many are in this predicament?
There are numbers. I did not look that up specifically, but I mean, millions. We're talking millions.
Millions of women are trafficked.
Millions. And Wisconsin actually is also one of the hubs, Wisconsin and Minnesota, particularly with indigenous women, and they're trafficking them west. And Interstate 40 is a big trafficking route from the Chicago area and the Midwestern area with indigenous women, and trafficking them west to Vegas, where it's still illegal, and also to the West Coast, and then on ships going elsewhere.
Are there organizations that are helping these women who are being trafficked that you could recommend our listeners get involved with? Or what kinds of activism, feminist activism, is there surrounding this trafficking problem?
There's a lot. A Coalition Against Trafficking in Women is the main one. So Coalition Against Trafficking in Women. And then there are lots of them that are smaller agencies in Minnesota. Carter was her name. Anyway, a lot of them are founded by women who have escaped the trafficking trade. And there are groups all around the country that are doing smaller groups, but for a nation, for a worldwide, actually, Coalition Against Trafficking Women. And if you get on that website, then you will see list of all the other places to call, depending on where you live, who is available to work on that issue in your area. You have to be very careful because a lot of the traffickers and the gangs have set up fake groups and fake websites pretending to be trafficked women, or they are trafficked women, and they are promoting sex work. There is no such thing as sex work. Sex work is abuse of women, period. And there are many people who have pushed and are pushing to use sex work as if it was a legitimate work category.
There's no such thing as sex work, I immediately think of the trans activists in Madison who say that that is hateful towards women who are workers and this is what they do. It's like any other kind of work and they're being paid and it's compensated, and so why can't we call it work? I know I'm not in that group, but I'm just hearing those voices in my head because I live in Madison, and supposedly the feminists in Madison are
Say
about
that.
sex worker rights.
I know.
What can we say to that?
Well, again, there's a lot of research and writing on this, and you can find it on the website. Oh, the other place is Melissa Farley, Farley. She has a website. I forgot the name of the website, but it's prostitution something. Lots of papers and research on that, and several things. And what I say is, if this is work, then how does it meet the labor conventions? Time, breaks, weekends, safety precautions. Does OSHA come in and check the place where they're working? It meets none of the requirements of what we consider to be work or any of the protections or safety measures or alternatives that we have when we do, in fact, have a job that is considered work. Not that any of them are wonderful. I mean, working in Amazon warehouse is a terrible job, but at least you have somebody you can call when you're abused. Now, the other part of it is they're paid. Are they paid? In Germany, where prostitution is legal completely decriminalized, the women are not paid. They're trafficked, and then the traffickers take the money as, it costs to bring you here from Africa. It costs to keep you in this apartment. It costs to dress you in these clothes. It costs to take you to the hospital when the buyer beats you up. It costs to get that abortion that you need when you got pregnant. So all of these costs have used up every penny you got, and the goddamn woman doesn't get a dime, and she dies within 4 years. That is the average lifespan of a woman in prostitution. Is that a job?
No, it's not a job. It's terrible. It's exploitation. But
it's abuse. It's
sold.
Exploitation and abuse.
It gets sold to women as a job that will, help you pay your bills and is glamorous even. And then you get these women who advertise it that way, and it's terrible.
Yep. Well, we had Pretty Woman. Remember Pretty Woman?
Right. It's just
and then recently we had that movie that Ananya or whatever it was that won a goddamn Academy Award. It was a terrible movie, and it was all about the great idea of being a prostitute. But this guy has made 2 or 3 movies about prostitutes. I think he has a real issue himself. And it's gotten into the culture as if it were an okay thing. And this is why it's so hard to fight it, but we have to fight it. And many of these groups that I mentioned are led by people who have survived and have said none of what you're being told is true. But it just as with the trans activists, when there is so much money and so much power behind them, it's hard to stop it.
Yeah, it really is. But here we are, Dianne, and we walk in a lot of the same circles. And it's wonderful to have you as a guest on WLRN. So thank you. My guest today is Dianne Post. She's an attorney. She's written several publications, a couple of books, and she's talking with us today about male bias in U.S. laws and how the law really does not protect women and children, women and girls from male predators and the violence that we experience in our society. If you could design, Dianne, and implement the perfect laws to protect women and girls in the United States from commercial sex exploitation, what would those laws look like?
Well, my answer to that is laws will never protect anybody from sexual abuse. Period. Because by the time the law sets the baseline, the bottom floor of how a person is supposed to behave in a society. That's what the law does. So by the time they have violated the law, it's too late. It's already happened. So law is not going to be the thing that stops the abuse. It can't be. So what can you do? Many things. Well, actually, there's only two things that I know that have worked. One is separation, and the other, one is separation, and the other is more equality. They've tried separation in several ways. I mean, lesbian feminists, separatists did that, living on your own land and having our own music festivals and bookstores and things like that. And in some countries where I have lived and worked, they have women-only police stations, because women will not go to the police station to report a rape or domestic violence or beating by their husband because of the way they're treated in the police station. And then they get raped again and beat again in the police station. So they won't go. In Japan, for example, in Korea, they have women-only train cars. Only women can get in these particular cars of public transportation because the men do not know how to behave and can't behave like human beings in public. The problem with that, I mean, it's a solution and it works. But the problem is it always is breached at some point in time. The men break in, the men destroy the festivals, the men, all the trans activists insist that they get to be in our space, blah, blah, blah. It always ends by attack somehow. I mean, marauders break into the nunnery and rape all the nuns. I mean, at some point, it stops working. The other thing that has, in fact, worked is equality. In the country where women have more equality in terms of political representation, higher education, income equality, those kinds of things, there's less violence.
That makes so much sense. And that's a cultural thing where women have more status somehow. Yes. How do you raise the status of women?
Exactly. So these are the Nordic countries. These are the Nordic countries, the same ones that started the Nordic model regarding prostitution, obviously. So that's the other thing that we know works, and that's something feminists have been working for since the beginning of, recorded time. Before recorded time, we were in charge and there wasn't violence. There were 1,500 years in Crete when women were in charge and there was no evidence of any violence. So we know that a, quote, matriarchal or an egalitarian society does not spawn violence. So that's
possible.
And that it is possible. And what do we have to do? We have to do everything. And this is one thing I used to say, and I still do say, that we feminist women, we have to do everything all of the time. And the problem is one person can't. You absolutely can't do everything all of the time because you will, number one, you don't have the skills and the abilities, and number two, you will burn out very quickly. So we each have to figure out what we can do and do it. We all have a talent, we all have a skill, we all have something we can bring. Bring that. And however big or little it is needed, it is helpful. Every action ripples out to other actions. Every action gives other women courage to do something, and that's what we have to do. Even more so today than ever before.
So again, women are burdened with our own acts of freedom and liberation to get ourselves out of this situation. And you have outlined here for us today what the laws look like in the United States, and they don't look that great.
No.
And our culture doesn't look that great either. So we've got a lot of work to do, Dianne. Are there any parting words you'd like to share?
Well, just nobody is coming to save us. There is no Calvary. There are no white knights. Nobody's coming to save us. We have to save ourselves. And we have to do it, as you said earlier, everybody does their part, whatever they can do, and we do it together. And that's how we're going to survive. That's how we have survived. And that's how we're going to do it.
Hear, hear. Dianne Post, thank you so much.
Hi, it's Ann Castile here, WLRN's producer and sound engineer. I'm also the outreach coordinator for a pretty cool gathering that I think you should know about. The XX Amazons Uprising 2025 is taking place from October 2nd to the 6th in Northwest Arkansas. The uprising aims to celebrate and strengthen lesbian communities in the female-centered world. We welcome and encourage women of every generation, color, class, other diversity, and those detransitioning to attend. At the uprising, we have workshops, discussion groups, community activities, song and gifting circles, collective meals, and ritual and spirituality times. We're all volunteers, coming together to learn, network, and ultimately build a radical, lesbian, feminist future. To register or for more information, go to xxamazons.org/uprising or email us at uprising@xxamazons.org. I hope to see you there.
You are listening to WLRN, brought to you by the totally excellent radical feminists at Women's Liberation Radio News.
And now for poignant, pivotal, and compelling commentary from none other than our very own Sekhmet Shiel. Take it away, Sekhmet.
I want to talk about porn and prostitution from a different angle than the one we radical feminists typically take. I want to talk about sex and female sexuality specifically. I think too often when feminists critique porn and prostitution, they disconnect these two industries and the female experience within them from female sexuality categorically, and this does us all a disservice. We spend a lot of time talking about what sex should not be in the female experience and very little time thinking about and discussing what sex should be like for us. Liberal women made an attempt at figuring that out when they branched off from radical feminism, but they ultimately got swallowed up by the liberal male sexual agenda, falling for the con that the only way to escape and contradict right-wing control of female sexuality was to flee into the equally sick and misogynistic left-wing control of female sexuality. So let's start with basic facts. Women are sexual beings. We have sex drives. We are capable of sexual pleasure. Most women want to experience sexual pleasure. These statements have always been factual and always will be. It's also a fact that female sexuality has been indescribably disfigured for all of human history on a global scale by and for males, such that it feels almost impossible to disentangle our sexuality from all the heteropatriarchal misogyny projected onto our bodies and ourselves. That's why most women get lost in the conservative versus liberal scam on the subject of sex. None of us have any idea what female sexuality would actually look like and feel like in a reality without male sexual violence and predation and male control of both the female body and the cultural image of female sexuality. No generation of women anywhere has ever known that, and we will never know. But if we don't consider what sex should be like for us, if we don't try to determine who we can and should be as sexual beings free of patriarchy and misogyny and the sexual projections of men, then we have nothing to work toward as individuals or as a feminist movement on the subject of sex. It's not enough to identify and critique what kind of sex women and girls should never endure, how our sexuality should not be depicted, controlled, shaped, sold, and weaponized. We have to imagine what we want and who we could be if we weren't sexually objectified by men from birth to death. In my opinion, sex can and should be an expression of genuine love, care, and emotional intimacy between a woman and her partner. Sex should leave women feeling loved, cared for, valued, nurtured, connected, wanted as unique individual human beings, and not just as a means to an orgasm. Women should feel genuinely safe in every moment of a sexual encounter, physically, emotionally, and mentally. Women should only have sex that feels comfortable, tender, sweet, fun, and joyful. I'm not passing judgment on women who have casual sex or taking a hard stand against it, but I do believe that women and teen girls should only share their sexuality with people who care about them, value them as people, and who can be trusted to respect their bodies, their feelings, and their psyches. And as far as how we express our sexuality, I think women should be able to pursue and act on their natural, genuine desires. I think in a female existence free of patriarchy and misogyny, we are sexual beings who are mentally, emotionally, and spiritually aligned with our bodies. And our sexuality flows in harmony and cohesion with every other part of us. Even if that isn't entirely possible for us in patriarchy, I think that's the goal we're striving for. I think the best, healthiest sexual experience we as women can have would ultimately feel like an act of loving ourselves through and with another person. It would feel like sex is something we do to connect with others and to express ourselves, not something we're being used for or something we ourselves use to get other things we want or need. It would feel like sex is one part of us, not the sum total of our social value. It would feel like a joy every time, not a chore or an obligation. Now think about the female experience in porn and prostitution compared to the ideal I just described. Radical feminists describe porn and prostitution as objectifying, dehumanizing, exploitative, and misogynistic all the time. But what does that actually mean? What do those words really mean in this context? The answer lies in how men and boys see those women and girls, which translates to how said men and boys treat and talk to and talk about the women and girls. Porn and prostitution, like rape itself, cuts love and care and connection out of sex. These industries reduce women and girls to bodies males can use for sexual gratification without knowing or caring who the women and girls are as people, without acknowledging or caring about the emotions and psychological experience of those women and girls. To the pimp and John and pornographer and the man or boy masturbating to the porn, the woman or girl in question isn't a person. Because she's not a person, she doesn't exist or matter beyond the time it takes to film the scene, or watch the scene, or service the client. Everything that makes her who she is, as a unique, irreplaceable person, all the details that a loving friend or spouse would value, and all of her emotions and desires and needs they would consider and care about, doesn't matter and doesn't even exist to those males. When we call porn and prostitution misogynistic, remember how literal that statement is. Witness the sheer hatred that men and boys demonstrate toward the women and girls they use in porn and prostitution. There isn't one iota of love, respect, care, or concern in these males for the women and girls they consume. They talk to and about those women and girls with violent derision. They laugh at and get aroused by the physical and psychological suffering and humiliation of the women and girls. They unleash all of their physical and verbal abuse onto prostituted women and girls because they know their wives and girlfriends wouldn't tolerate it. They don't care if the women and girls in porn and prostitution are physically injured, in pain, afraid, or in tears. Some of these men and boys actually enjoy all of the above. You only enjoy the pain and fear of people you hate. It isn't possible to love and care about someone while simultaneously inflicting pain and fear on her. It isn't possible to love and care about a woman or a girl and feel either indifferent to or excited by her pain and fear. Let's set aside the small minority of women who swear they chose to enter porn or prostitution out of genuine interest, enjoyed their experience, and suffered no emotional or psychological consequences. For the overwhelming majority of women, many of whom first enter these industries as teen girls, porn and prostitution affect the body, heart, and psyche in the same ways that rape and other forms of sexual assault do. Porn and prostitution traumatize the women and girls who participate in them. Trauma lives in the body, sometimes for life, and can have both long-term psychological and physical effects if not healed. I think we as feminists don't emphasize the significance of female trauma enough, especially when we talk about women and girls in porn and prostitution. Trauma changes you as a person forever, even if you manage to recover and heal from it. It can affect your physical health for the rest of your life, even to the point of creating terminal illness or chronic illness. It changes your ability to develop and maintain happy, healthy relationships with people, romantic and platonic. And even if you manage to heal your trauma, that process takes a lot of time, hard work, and money, and is usually an emotionally and mentally harrowing, exhausting experience in itself. If one rape can traumatize a woman or a girl for years, decades, the rest of her life, how much more does even a short period of porn or prostitution traumatize a woman or a girl? Sex can be the most emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, and physically intimate experience shared between two people. It can be a way of accessing love and connection at a level of intensity and depth otherwise inaccessible. It can be a way to express your love, appreciation, care, and desire for another person with the most amount of feeling possible. Which is why the ugliness and the cruelty of porn and prostitution should be literally horrifying and repulsive to us. The contrast, the gap between genuinely loving sex and the porn and prostitution industries is starker than we feminists even consciously grasp or acknowledge. The way men talk to and about women and girls in these industries alone should disqualify them from romantic relationships with women for life. Never mind the males who actually work in the porn industry or who traffic, pimp, and buy prostituted women and girls. Radical feminism professes that no woman or girl deserves to be sexually traumatized or violated for any reason ever, and recognizes that sexual violence committed against females by males is both a tool and a goal of patriarchy. We point this out so much that it's easy for us to gloss over the real consequences of this trauma and violence in women's lives, in girls' lives. And when we talk about porn and prostitution, we tend to lose sight of all the love and care and kindness that those women and girls are not experiencing in sex, getting caught up in big political words like commodification and objectification and even misogyny. You don't have to be an ex-porn actress or former prostitute to be a woman who's survived male sexual violence or who has never experienced loving, caring, kind sex with a partner who values you as a person. But it's the women and girls in porn and prostitution who show us just how mean and nasty and sadistic and ultimately devoid of any ability to recognize female humanity so many males are. Let porn and prostitution show you everything that sex should never be. What you as a woman should never tolerate in sex. Let porn and prostitution remind you of what patriarchy is really about for men. Let porn and prostitution motivate you to choose solidarity with all women over loyalty to males who would commit the sexual violence of those industries against women and girls, then laugh about it, profit off it, and bond with each other over it.
Thanks for listening to WLRN's 110th edition podcast on the legal aspects of prostitution with our guest, Dianne Post. Thank you so much, Dianne, for speaking with me about the terrible tragedy of prostitution and what women can do to fight it. Be sure to check out the links in the description to get involved in the advocacy work Dianne talked with me about in today's interview. Thanks for staying tuned to Feminist Community-Powered Radio, WLRN. This is Thistle, signing off for now.
Hi, this is Margaret, graphic designer here at WLRN. I based this month's image on the song Goodbye, Mississippi by Jess Hawk Oakenstar, which was suggested by our guest Dianne Post. A woman and a young girl are running from the dark side and going towards freedom. I used a satellite image of Gulfport, Mississippi in the background, and for freedom I included the torch from the Statue of Liberty. I added light to the little girl, and I made a path that suggests water and the flow of life. I intentionally overlapped the women and the girl because of the relationship of mothers and daughters, and also because even as adults we carry our young selves inside of us. I also emphasize the shadows for visual purposes as well as the symbolic shadow parts of ourselves, connected as they are with our experiences. Thanks for listening.
I'm Emily Grudler. Thanks for tuning in. Next month's podcast will be a retrospective of Pride. Thistle and I will be speaking with Ariane from the LGB Alliance. Our handcrafted podcasts always come out on the first Thursday of the month, so look for it Thursday, July 3rd. If you'd like to receive our newsletter that notifies you when each podcast, music show, and interview is released, please sign up on our WLRN WordPress site. Stay strong in the struggle, and thanks again for listening.
This is Ann Castile, signing off on another edition of WLRN's monthly handcrafted podcast. You can find us on X, Facebook, Instagram, and Spinster, and on our SoundCloud, in addition to our website. Thanks for listening.
And this is Aurora. Before I sign off for this month, I just wanted to let everyone know that on Sunday, June 15th, I will be doing another Radical Feminist Perspectives session for WDI, this time on Jane Caputi's excellent 1987 book, The Age of Sex Crime. So with that said, our monthly podcasts are always crafted with tender loving care and in solidarity with women worldwide. Thank you so much for your support. We would love to hear from you, so please share, like, and comment widely.
But how will we find our way out of this? What is the antidote for the patriarchal kiss? How will we find what needs to be shown? And then after that,